I guess I should get up close too. Hunkering back in the corner.
Yeah, just laid back, kick back, feet up on the desk. Hey, welcome guys. You got the Belfast team with you here. Got Lee, myself, Pastor Kurt, and Pastor Gary. We had a fantastic weekend with the Belfast team at Victory Church. Gary, I can't thank you guys enough, man. It was such a blessing to be here with y'all, and you guys have been so courteous and generous with your time and resources and just putting us up and getting us here, man. It really has been an amazing day. And as the days come forward, we'll be sure to share the pictures and the videos and stuff and just kind of the stuff that's come out of this. I love North Ireland. I'm ready to move here. I'm already talking to a realtor and trying to figure out how I can. I think what I need to do is just claim refugee status or asylum status, and just they'll put me up for free and stuff, and that should work. But initial thoughts on this weekend?
I really enjoyed it. I thought the fellowship was amazing. It was encouraging to be an encouragement to, well, I guess it would be about 150 people at least that were in attendance, maybe 200. And there was such a hunger for the word. People were here from not just Northern Ireland, but from Ireland, from the UK, from Iceland, Scotland. They were from all over the place. And there was a deep, deep hunger and a huge appreciation that men were willing to take of their time and come here and give them the prophetic word.
Yeah. That's Kurt.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Great time. Great hospitality on your part, your family, your church. Everyone is so friendly, and I'll tell you what. There's just I'm sure you guys have all seen it as well. Such a hunger here, such a hunger. The people are just eating it all up, and I'll tell you what. It's just been an incredible blessing to be here and to minister to people who are just so eager to hear and to learn and to grow and to be ministered to. It's been just fantastic.
Yeah. Pastor Gary.
Yeah, it's been a great conference. So we had about 200 on the Friday, about 220, 230 on the Saturday, and they were different. And then we had another 150 on the Sunday, and they were different again. So a load of people were getting blessed. Like I said, we had people from Iceland, people from Scotland, people from England, people from Wales, all travel over just for the conference. So Troy, yourselves, and everybody was worked really well together. Everybody got on really well, and the messages were just fantastic.
Yeah,
and specifically the testimonies.
Yeah,
I think the testimonies impacted people so much.
Yeah, I want to say too that I was really blessed with your church praise team, worship and praise team. Was really blown away because you hear it on YouTube and it sounds there's crackling, but to hear it in person was awesome. And also Pastor Troy Brewer, who's not with us here, he's with his family right now at a different location. I didn't know anything about him before we got here. I love the guy, and come to find out he lives about maybe an hour and a half from my house. So you'll be hearing more from Troy on my channel in the future, and I plan on trying to help and support his ministry with either the food bank stuff or the rescuing children and that kind of stuff. So really looking forward to. And his whole family was a blessing. So it was really good time. And again, the hospitality here I was blown away by it. So thank you for having us and everything you've done here for us. So I would love to reciprocate and have you come to the States at some point, you and your family, and maybe you can work something out here in the future. So as I put in the notes, right as we were logging on and stuff, trying to get this set up for tonight, we were going to do it last night, but it was such a long day. And he had to drive like 2 or 3 hours, and it was just like, all right, it's already really late, so let's just we'll push it off till tomorrow. But we wanted to take this opportunity it's the last time we're all going to be together for a while, and just one last chance to kind of get together and talk about some fascinating stuff that's going on. And as I put in the chat earlier, and as Lee and others have shared on Telegram and their social media, yeah, just keep praying for my mom. You guys know her. She's been in the chat. She tries to go. She's always in Kurt's chat. She's always in Lee's or mine or Gary's. Just lift her up. She had a stroke, and I just found out 5 minutes before we came on. So we prayed here. I just continue to lift her up in your prayers. She's 81. She's been in relatively really good health up until this point. So I was pretty shocked at that. So I may be heading up to Idaho as soon as I get back to Texas. So, anyways, I'm leaving out as early as I can tomorrow. I can't move any faster than I'm already moving in terms of getting back, but I'll keep you all updated as I find out more information. Again, just keep her in your prayers. All right. So tonight we're talking about ancient conspiracies, and one of the things that's really bothered me over the last few years is, and the reason that I think I keep coming back to this topic is that, you'll have one of the biggest influencers in the world, Joe Rogan. He'll have guys on like Graham Hancock and others that are presenting a history that it directly contradicts what the Bible talks about. And it's bothered me, and because it's gaining momentum in so many different facets, and we're starting to see these ideas of Tartaria, the mud flood, ancient aliens, all of this stuff that's being put out as history. And I think what is troubling to me is that for those of us who know our Bibles, we obviously can see through this deception, but there's so many people out there that are so confused over what's going on and what's happened in the past that I think it at least warrants an initial discussion, if not maybe more, going forward to kind of counteract this delusion and perversion of human history. Um, it's something that we need to be emboldened to challenge, because I think a lot of younger people are getting their news as we see people transition from watching mainstream news, which is already biased and propaganda, government-funded propaganda, as it were. I think also what most of the younger Generation Z, Generation Alpha, millennials are getting their history lessons from TikTok and from Instagram and other places by influencers who are not Christian. And you'll see that as these things morph into conspiracy theories and they're trying to be presented as credible, you'll start to see anti-Semitism. I don't know. Every major influencer that I've seen that deals with conspiracy theory, you watch their programs long enough, you'll start to see that there is an anti-Semitic flavor to a lot of the reasonings. Are you guys seeing that the same way, or with Candace Owens and others?
No, Candace Owens, man, she is a classic example of that one for sure. But Tucker Carlson as well. I mean, yeah.
Ian Carroll's on Instagram. He's dropping stuff in the last few days, in the few weeks, really, talking about the Schofield Bible, how that was purposely funded so that it could, by the Rockefellers, or by the Rothschilds rather, so they could put the Jews in a good light. And so this is going to impact how people understand prophecy and how they understand what the Bible not only says about the past, but what it's going to say about the future. And so this is an initial salvo going forward. I plan on revisiting this topic many times. Lee, any thoughts just on my opening statement there?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is that as soon as you walk away from the literal understanding of Bible prophecy, you are in and of itself walking in the direction of doctrinal anti-Semitism. And that will feed fire, feed the occasion, feed the opportunity for you to become emotionally anti-Semitic.
Yeah. All right. Let me get here to Genesis chapter 9. If you guys have your Bibles, go to Genesis 9. And let's start with, we'll pick it up in verse, let's see here. Let me just start here at the beginning, and I'll skip back down to the end. When Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives and the animals, when the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, we have what's called the Noahic covenant that takes place. And you start to see that at the end of chapter 8, and really it's expanded in chapter 9. And one of the things that God told Noah and his sons and daughters-in-law to do was to, and I'm going to read this here and pick it up verse 1. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. I'm going to stop there. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Okay. So that is the first instructions that God tells them to do. And of course, we see in Genesis 11, that's not what happened. The sons, the descendants of Noah and his wife, they ended up congregating on the plains of Shinar. And the traditional thinking all the way back for hundreds and hundreds of years was that Shinar was in southern Iraq, where we find there's some massive, I believe it's just one, but it may be more than one, these massive ziggurats that are located about 30 to 40 miles south of Baghdad, and probably about 120 miles from the actual coastline where modern day Kuwait and like Basra and all that is today. And so I've read an article not too long ago in one of these academic creation journals, challenging the traditional thinking about where Babylon or Babel, excuse me, where Babel was located at. And I'm going to share a screen here with you guys real fast. And I think what I'd like to do is present the counter argument that not that where we think of Babel, not Babylon. We know Babylon was in southern Iraq, but that was almost 1,500 years later. But right after the flood, probably within about 200 years, the descendants of Noah and his sons, they all congregated in one location. So let me share the screen here with you real fast, and then you'll get to see what I'm talking about. All right, so on the right, or excuse me, on the left here, number 1, it says, you have Noah's Ark. We know that the Ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. And what they are saying is that they basically traveled straight south to where modern day, just south of modern day Baghdad. And when you read Genesis, let me see if it's in, I didn't know if you already had this pulled up or not.
I did.
Oh, let's see, Genesis.
What are you looking for?
I think it's in Genesis 11 here. Okay, here it is. Genesis 11, it says, verse 1, now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and I'll get to the one language and one speech here because that seems a little redundant. But
Yep.
And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So it says that he journeyed from the east. Now, I did just a Google map here, and I did it where you would a walking path instead of driving or anything, flying or anything. This is what, if you were walking, how would you walk from where the mountains of Ararat and Noah's Ark rested? You would not be coming from the east if you were going directly to southern Iraq, or what is modern day southern Iraq. The counter proposal is that the actual place where the Tower of Babel was located at is in the K-bar triangle, which is in the second slide there. And you can see there's a blow up of it. And what's interesting to me is that they would be coming from the east, traveling west, and it looks like they would have set up here in the K-bar triangle. And not only that, but if you were to travel just a little bit further, you have one of the oldest archaeological discoveries in modern history, just right beyond that at a site called Göbekli Tepe. Now, Göbekli Tepe has only been partially excavated, but the things that they found there is fascinating. They've got these massive pillars. This is truly a lot of megalithic structures inside of here. A lot of these pillars have carvings on them, carvings of animals. There's a lot of animals on there, and just weird things that you we are trying to wrap our minds around. And here's where I'm getting to with regard to the perversion of history, is that if my theory is correct, and if the article's theory is correct, I'll post the I posted it on Twitter, but I'll go back and put this in the underneath the descriptions. And the author of this, she does a huge deep dive on why she is saying that this is the location. You can see that one of the main reasons why it should be in the second part of the slide there is because after the flood, all of the water began to recede from the high ground and it sinks to the lowest places. And that's the way that water always does. It goes down the path of least resistance and it begins to pool at the lowest locations, or what we would call today sea level. And southern Iraq, where the Tower of Babel, where the original thought was there in the first section, where it's straight south, that is only 98 feet above what is sea level today. Now, that means that most of southern Iraq would still be underwater for hundreds of years, wow, if not longer. And that's problematic because, for one, you wouldn't build a tower in water, and you also wouldn't build a tower in this muddy, marshy plains where the stones wouldn't even be able to support the structure that big. And we know that the southern Iraq was still marshy up until the 1950s, when Saddam Hussein's father created the Ba'athist Party there, and his son Saddam began to drain the southern marshes in southern Iraq because it was filled with a bunch of Shia, and Saddam Hussein and his father, they were Sunni. The Shia were like the indigenous natives there. They were always causing problems. They had a problem with Saddam Hussein. They had a problem with the Sunnis. And we know from just recent history that Saddam Hussein killed tens of thousands of Kurds. He used chemical weapons against the Kurds. He's attacked and tried to drive out all the Shia that were in southern Iraq. And he did that by draining these marshy swamps and the marshes there. So if it's still marshy, 4,000 years later, you can only imagine what it would have looked like just a couple hundred years after the flood.
Yep.
Okay, so with that said, the reason why this is why, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys here in a second. The reason why I think that the second part of the slide here is so important is because Göbekli Tepe has been one of these recent archaeological discoveries that guys like Graham Hancock and others are starting to insert these ideas that human history goes back. They're dating this to about 11 to 12,000 years old. Now, if we just use biblical genealogy in Genesis chapter 5, Genesis chapter 10, if we just take the ages of the people, and we could put a little leeway in buffer room in there, but it really only comes out to about 6,000 years. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about Graham Hancock's belief that Göbekli Tepe was about 11,000 years old, and then the Younger Dryas issue that comes up with a lot of these ancient cultural flood stories that we have. They'll admit that there was a flood, but they don't call it the Noahic flood. They call it the Younger Dryas, and it's around that same time. And so this is where, when you create this vacuum like this in time, you begin to insert all sorts of false histories, false narratives, and that's where things like ancient aliens and all this other stuff comes rushing in. So, Leah, what do you think? I mean, am I crazy to think this, or does it seem plausible, reasonable?
Well, I like this theory. I mean, when I first heard the theory, I was a little skeptical, but when you step back, you survey the big picture, you look at the historical evidence that's presented for a location in Babylon, and it basically boils down to not much more than an assumption that Babylon and Babel have to be the same place. When you look at the evidence that Pete brings forth from this article that he's presenting, there's some strong considerations, even from the Bible. I mean, if they headed from the east to the west, that implies that they headed from the east to the west.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is grade school understanding of the scriptures. This isn't rocket scientist approach to the scriptures. So I think it's definitely worth the consideration. And another thing that it brings up is now we have what I would regard as a spiritual link between the original Babylon, or the original Babel, pardon me, and the later Babylon, and then the nations that follow. because the way it's generally understood, we have a spiritual connection from Babylon to Persia to Greek to Rome to fractured Rome to the modern day, which out of which the mass of Babylonianism, the Antichrist is going to come. But when this theory here that's being presented, when you take this, that spiritual string doesn't start with Persia, it starts with Babylon. Babylon itself was just the rebirth of the spirit of Babel. It had already transferred its location.
Kurt? Thoughts?
Yeah, I just have to agree and saying that you know, if you try and change what we see when you look at the genealogies, you bring that back in time, right? They try and extend that further than what we see in the Word of God. Listen, all the time, all they're trying to do is they're trying to replace the things that we see in the narrative of the Word of God and come up with some other narrative out there so that they can either replace the Jews or replace God Himself. And so, yeah, that problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the theory is interesting. I think that regardless, Göbekli Tepe is going to be fitted into the narrative of, like, certainly the Nephilistic narrative of bringing that across the world. And I know that Elie Marzulli would stipulate that he believes there was a mass exodus in terms of, certainly at the time in the season of Joshua, the expelling of the Canaanite tribes, that there was an exodus across the world, and which it probably wouldn't fit the time frame, but it probably would fit the geography, because if you were taking that in that sense, like we here in Ireland, we can trace both our megalithic structures, the giant narratives, and all of the sort of, I guess, watcher element that goes along with that, back to Turkey. And certainly that area that expands around it. Where I sort of fall in this is when it's talking about Shinar, it's talking about Babylon. I look at the likes of Zechariah chapter 5, and I find it very interesting, because when I read Zechariah chapter 5, there's this prophecy that is given about, when you read into it, it's a future religion that is an apostasy. It is kind of a hint towards the Revelation 17 beast system that talks about, and it is identified as 3 flying, let's say, ladies, right? Yeah. One I would see as the wickedness, as the kind of Thyatira approach. I'd see that as Roman Catholicism. The other 2 I would see as basically all of this framing in terms of Chrislam. But in Zechariah chapter 5, that bowl is set down in Shinar. So if I was taking it under a modern day lens, as not as in looking where's that happened, I would look at the Arabian Peninsula in that way. If you get me, you know, the establishment of the Abrahamic family house. But I can see how all of this fits together. My stipulation, though, would be I've always looked at Zechariah chapter 5 as a fulfilled prophecy, certainly since 2022. I'm going, right, hold on. These guys, we've got Islam, we've got Judaism, we've got Christianity, all coming together. It is the fulfillment of that wicked woman in Zechariah chapter 5, and the place in which that was the Arabian Peninsula. And that, to me, hints towards Shinar. Now, whether at the same time that's a spiritual Shinar, like a typology, I don't know, because it's the same way I know that when you're talking about Mystery Babylon, we probably all have different concepts. Is that a literal Babylon, right? You know, right. Well, not Mystery Babylon, the return of Babylon in the city. Is that the return of ancient Babylon? Because I think most people will look at Iraq and think, how's that going to happen?
Yeah, you need like 20 or 30 years to really kind of rebuild that place and make it. And not only that, it's not near the coastline anywhere.
Yeah, and then I know that then there's probably among us who would see that as, again, a typology. So it's probably represented in the modern day city, like some think New York, some I've even suggested London, that sort of thing, you know, economic capitals.
Well, and even in what Saudi Arabia,
oh, sorry.
Even with It's live, right?
Yeah.
No redos. Just gotta roll with it.
Even in which Saudi Arabia under bin Solomon is talking about and is doing actually
Yeah.
in with building this the line, the Neom, all of this. And I mean, what is the number or the percentage right now? Isn't it something like 20% or something like that of the world's?
You can see it in the map, like
Right.
on Google Maps, you can see the extension of it.
But something like 20%, I think, of all the world concrete, I think, is going towards us. Have you guys heard that?
Yeah.
It's something like that. I mean, I don't know. That's absolutely phenomenal. And then what do we do with, now that Trump is back in office again and everything is being, reignited with the whole Abraham Accords too.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Can I ask? So in this sense, the megalithic structures in terms of what we're seeing in Turkey there, is there evidence to suggest? Because I believe there's evidence to suggest that there's kind of a hegemony, like a continuation of this around the world.
There is.
That all of these megalithic structures have the same kind of origin story.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if there's anything, and that we see here that actually points to that. Because one of the things that I find interesting,
Yeah, that's it right there.
oh wow,
Yeah, it's massive.
but the symbol, and it's kind of like it's a swirl. I call it the swirly symbol. It's kind of, I would say it as a depiction of our galaxy, like the Milky Way.
Yep.
And I could turn around and I could take you to 100 different sites here,
Yeah.
probably 800 different sites here, where all of that symbol is stamped upon each one.
Yep.
A lot of the pagans will see it as a New Age thing, will see it as the universe of life. But one of the interesting things for me, and this is where the connection, because one of our oldest sites here, Brunaboyne or Newgrange, which is 5,200 years old, and you go down, it's perfectly spherical structure. You can go in, we talked about this, that it lights up at the time of the winter solstice. Every cavern within it lights up. But that symbol is stamped everywhere.
Yep.
And the bones that we're finding that. So I'm just wondering if this is like, I call it the Nephilistic news cycle, that this story gets carried on like it, because the bones that we're finding in it, the individual's DNA were traced back to
Noah's, Jacob.
but they were actually traced back to Turkey.
Okay,
So that's what makes me think, is this like this, you're going along and you're telling the same story, then let's stamp this on it. And then when you look at that symbol, when you see Brunaboyne, the Brunaboyne, Boyne was this goddess, and she was called the Milky Cow, a representation of the Milky Way.
What you would call?
Milky Cow.
Okay.
Sorry, I have to change my accent.
Oh, okay.
I have to change my accent for everybody. And then that would be a representation of also the Egyptian deity Hathor.
Yeah.
And you can see that this is kind of the story that's continued. And that's interesting because of Babylon. Because when you take in the Masonic circles, there's this teaching that you had Enoch, son of Cain. You heard me talking about that. Enoch, son of Cain, in certain Masonic circles, is seen as a helper to Nimrod in Genesis 11. And Enoch, son of Cain, then goes along and he branches this off, teaches the 7 sciences and the 7 sacred sciences and all of this. But that's carried around the world.
Yeah.
And it kind of, certainly in terms of like the expansion through the world in terms of geography, it's very, very interesting.
Like they have a shared crisis, a shared issue that they can all cultures, whether you're in South America, Mesoamerica, you're in Northern Europe, you're in Africa, you're in Southeast Asia, and in the what we call Siberia today, Northern Asia into Southern Russia, the high plains there. They all seem to have the same stories, and they all seem to have the same structures. That's why we find ziggurats everywhere.
I just pulled this one up here, the one in Russia. This one, if you guys have seen this one before.
I mean, that looks like exactly like the one in Syria.
Right.
But it's so entrenched into the stories that you even take the likes of so the pagans. Obviously, I don't know if everybody agrees. I see hard Babylon. I see the end time religion as kind of a new age approach to everything. Now I see the three monotheistic religions as the backbone to it, but I see this idea of always lead to the same place. And when you take that new age type approach and you start to look at it, it's ingrained in everything. Because if you take the pagan and certainly the Wiccan and the pagan calendar,
Right.
when you sort of implant that over, say, for instance, the biblical calendar, you can actually see the ingrained perversion. So if you take the likes of Imbolc in the Irish, so that's also adopted by the Wiccan calendar. At the same time of Imbolc, the Imbolc literally means to be hidden away in the womb. So it's about like it's a picture of pregnancy. It's hidden away in the womb. And it's at the exact same time as Purim. And what was the whole picture of Purim? Is that the Jewish people were hidden. They were kind of concealed, hymns going about looking who is, let's find all the Jews. And you start to see this all the way through. And then, like you say, it's everywhere, because see, once you get to, and you take that pagan calendar and you see that what the enemy's trying to do is superimplant that upon a biblical time frame. You get to like September, October, start of September, October, in the pagan calendar, you come across Mabon, which is like, with the new moon, they celebrate Mabon. And then I looked at the writings of ancient Romans, and they talk about this. Julius Caesar identified who Mabon was, because in the Irish and the Welsh culture, for instance, there's two individuals, Culwin and Ulrich, and they are told that they want to marry, but they're from different backgrounds. And they're told by this giant, the best way for you to be approved for this marriage is for you to go down into this subterranean cave and free this individual from this cave who's been locked up from this eternal abyss called Mabon. Julius Caesar identified that individual as Apollo. And you see, it's how all of this. It's like you've got the Bible, which is like clear. And then the best thing the enemy can do is say, well, I'll superimplant this on top of it, and that'll add confusion.
Right.
And I think that's what we see with every type of megalithic structure and the plan around this. Can I throw a question into the mix?
Sure.
So I was actually talking to Troy earlier in regards to megaliths. It's the same thing that I've talked to Josh Peck about. Would you see that as something like a portal in terms of evil, or do you know what I mean? Is so certainly within the pagan culture in Ireland, the megalithic structure was always seen as an entrance into Tir na Nog, the land of ever living, right? The land of never growing old. Would you see it in that way? Would you see that could be, like?
Yes, but not in the way like some people look at churn, like it's like it's a question of physics. I think it's a supernatural, not a physical whole. And it's really wherever a place has been dedicated to the fallen realm or owned by the fallen realm, that is a special place. And it can be a living room, it can be a basement, it can be a temple, it can be one of these ancient sites. Now, one thing I wanted to bring out, the ancient pagans, the two main gods in it for all practical purposes were Venus and Mars, regardless of what names they gave them. One was the White Witch, one was the Red Dragon. And with Rome, it was the god of war, and it was the White Goddess or the White Witch. And these two appear over and over again. Now, what these petroglyphs are that are found around the world, there's a spiral petroglyph, there's a concentric circles petroglyph, which might have 2, 3, or 4 rings with the dot in the middle. Then you have what they call the squatter man, which can be a simple squatter man, like a little stick figure with the 2 legs coming down and the 2 legs, arms going up. and it can be with no ribs, 1 rib, 2 ribs, or 3 ribs. These figures are all able to be replicated on a regular basis in a plasma lab. These are all plasma discharges, and every plasma scientist in the world knows exactly what these are. And so the humans, when either Venus or Mars would make a close pass to the Earth, they would see these manifestations coming from the goddess and from the god. And so that's why they mark them on rock walls and temples around the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Wow.
So just I'll have to put some links in the show notes after. But what I was going to show you guys, or I guess I have to hold it up there. You're not gonna be able to see it, but when you go to Göbekli Tepe, there are carvings. Every one of these pillars are massive. Imagine if you can think about Stonehenge, how big those pillars are that are standing on both standing vertically and the ones laid across top. They're way bigger than, I was going to say huger. They're way bigger than way bigger than a normal man. These things are like 15, 20 feet tall, and they're massive. I mean, many, many tons. But every one of them is just chock full of carvings of animals. Some animals that we recognize. There's a lot of animals that we don't recognize. And what's fascinating to me was that when you go to the Ark in Kentucky, what was the town north of not Owensboro, Noah's Ark, the one that they recreated to size, to scale. In there, they had a lot of animals. Remember all the dinosaur type animals that they had that they could have taken. Now, these aren't full grown dinosaurs, just like they wouldn't have taken full grown elephants or full grown rhinos. They would have just taken them as babies or as puppies or whatever, calves. And then during that course of that year, obviously they would have grown. By the time they would have gotten out at the end of that year of being on the Ark, they would have been about the age of beginning to reproduce and so forth. But it's just fascinating to me that there's so many of these animals on here, and that has a direct correlation with what just happened. They had all these animals on the Ark. The Ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. They would have traveled down the best way they could have by foot. And the reason I had that other slide up with the world, let me get to that in a second. But before I leave this slide, when we think about Shinar, the traditional thought was that Shinar was all in southern Iraq.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you think about Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia is that Greek word, like between the rivers, that started in southern Iraq, but it went all the way over to Syria and even to northern, what would be Israel, and that was called the Levant, right? And so, think about it this way: you have Mesopotamia, you have the southern part of that is Sumer, and then Sumeria. That's where that whole Sumerian culture comes from. And then the top of that, the northern part of that, from say Mosul north, is what we would consider Shinar. And it's pretty flat up there. When I was in Iraq back there in 2006, I was right to I was about 20 minutes as the crow flies from Mosul. So I was in a place called Talafar. Right from where I was at in Talafar, which is incredibly flat, you could see the Sinjar Mountains. And the Sinjar Mountain is when you look at Google Maps and stuff, you can see it's right below where I think the K-Bar Triangle. It's not very far from where the K-Bar Triangle is. And so I've been right up to that border, and it's very easily could have housed the Tower of Babel. And then when you look at Nimrod and all of the towns and stuff that he created or built or whatever, they're all in that northern area. Now, this slide here, what I was going to show is that we also know that according to secular historians, secular archaeologists, everybody kind of agrees that there was some kind of an ice age that happened.
Absolutely.
Now, think about it this way. This is what the world would look like today if all of the ice caps had melted. That's how much land would be lost. And what wasn't, if you look there in Iraq, here, this would be mostly all of Iraq right here. And all of that would be underwater.
Wow.
So your beachfront property would be way up there by Mosul or north of Mosul, which is way in northern Iraq. And if you think back to that Superman movie, I think it was Superman where Lex Luthor, and he's buying up all this worthless desert land, right? And what his plan was to have some missile, I forget what the missile was, land and crash in California, and then that would have sunk, that would have hit the San Andreas Fault, that would have triggered that. All of that would have went into the ocean, and he would have been holding all of this beachfront property. That was like the whole gist of the movie. But in reality, if the world didn't have the polar ice caps that we have in the north as well as Antarctica in the south, this is what the world probably looked like right after the flood. I mean, most of the water would still be at levels that we wouldn't recognize today. And it took the ice age, took the cooling and freezing of that water into these vast glaciers and ice sheets and ice shelves, and most of what we consider the North Pole. That is what is holding back a lot of that water, right? So if, let's just say hypothetically, global warming were true, man-made global warming were true, this is what they're projecting the world would look like if if the polar ice caps melted, right? Both the north and the south. And so you could see how radically different this was. Now, speaking to the Tower of Babel in particular, though, I had sent you that thing on the Irish people, and I thought this was fascinating. And let me just kind of read this, and then I'll let you guys comment on this. It says the Japhetic people are, in general, the peoples of India and Europe, so the Indo-European stock. And it's interesting, if you look at an Indian person, you go to India, they have very Caucasian type features, but they just have really dark skin and dark hair, dark eyes. But the features are the same, and it's different. Those facial features are different from when you go to sub-Saharan Africa.
Yep.
The bone structures are different. The cheeks are higher. Everything is kind of just structurally different with that line of people. But here it says that the people of both India that are now what we consider India, that live in India, and the Europeans. And what's fascinating to me is that the original use of the word Aryan comes from like India.
Yeah.
And then it migrates up to modern day Persia, which is not far from India. And that's what the Germans in World War II kind of jumped on this bandwagon with creating the Aryan race. But they're all descendants of Japheth, who is one of the sons of Noah. So there's Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Okay, it says the whole Celtic race has been regarded as descended from Gomer. Through history suggests modern Celts are descended from both Gomer and Magog. Archaeologists and ethnologists agree that the first Indo-European group to spread across Europe were the Celts. The Irish Celts claim to be descendants of Magog, while the Welsh Celts claim to be descendants of Gomer. Irish chronicles, genealogies, and I think the Irish probably, in terms of ancient peoples, have done some of the best cataloging of their history of most of like what we'd consider I don't want to say barbarians, but like the Scythians and all the people that just went straight north to the Russia, the Stands, Ukraine, kind of the Eastern Europe flavor. They didn't keep a lot of their records, but the Irish did. And the Irish chronicles, the genealogies, plus an extensive number of manuscripts which have survived from ancient times reveal their roots. And the Irish were descendants of the Scythians, who are also known as the Magogians. And there's all sorts of etymological and archaeological evidence that backs this stuff up. So when I sent that to you, what were your first thoughts? We were like, what?
Well, my first thoughts were the Scythians were this fierce race.
Yeah.
There's reports by Herodotus that the Great Wall of China that was built to keep them out. That made me think, well, I can see that for people over here. I can see the fierceness. I can see the ability to be great warriors, and I can see the connection in that. And actually, it does make sense. And like I said, the certainly what we have in terms of history is what I would say is an ancient biblical narrative, but a very twisted biblical narrative. And if the Scythians are, like we know that they go north, according to Herodotus, that they become sort of located in the area as well that we would know now as modern Russia, or at least the old Soviet Union in that territory.
Yeah.
And in that sense that they go that far north, and they're involved in, if they fall under the spirit of Gog, if we're talking Gog and Magog in that sense, then they're susceptible to perversion. They're susceptible to being led astray from the truth. And I can attest to that in my own nation for certainly the last sort of 20, 30 years, that there's been a departure from the truth of Christianity. Christianity's been shunned by the political class. It's been completely pushed to the side because they blame that as the root of all trouble. But when you look at it, I think you're seeing, one, a spiritual connection in that way. Two, you can look at the fierceness. But also, like I said, if you come back to what we see as so we don't have, just so anybody knows, we don't have an origin story in Ireland. What we have is an invasion story. And the earliest sort of invasion story that we have is this apocryphal take on the flood. So you have what we know as the flood is in Genesis 6 on to the disembarkation in Genesis 9. We know that it was Noah and his family, 8 individuals who survived. Well, according to the Irish Book of Invasions, what you have is Noah's kind of disowned granddaughter. She was very willful, so Noah says, "You're not getting on the ark." So she got a band of a load of people together. They built their own ark, and they says, "Right, we're away off to find the coldest, rainiest country that we can and start civilization there." And that's and it's interesting then, because then you start to see the narrative of like that continued story, because in Ireland we have the story of the Tuatha Dé. Now, we don't, quite a lot of certainly historians don't like to connect Dan to that, because that's the tribe of Danu, but it seems that historically that was added on later. But the Tuatha Dé are the God tribe, and in the Book of Invasions, how did the God tribe arrive in Ireland? They arrive in ships, but not ships that sail in the sea, ships that sail in the sky. So it's that narrative that we get from our Book of Invasions.
Yep.
And like, don't get me wrong, most modern day historians will say, well, that was just Irish myth. But I, for one, look at mythology, like certainly the mythology around most cultures, and say there's historicity in that. People might embellish, but I have no problem believing in, when I read the Book of Joshua and then turn around and look at the Grecian stories of, these minotaurs and things like that, and starting to see the similarities between the two. So I think, I want to, in a lot roundabout way, saying I think there's weight to that.
Yeah. So, Pastor Kurt, and I know this feels like we're kind of jumping around a bit, but I'm going to tie this together. We're talking about ancient histories. We're talking about the perversion of the biblical story of humanity as the Bible tells us, from both Adam and Noah going forward. And I mentioned earlier about how at the time that the floodwaters were receding, what the modern day secularists, scientists, and global warming proponents are really hyping on is that because of global warming, the Arctic and the Antarctic is thawing, right? And this is, to me, there's tie-ins to modern day stuff that we see going on in the news today. Trump, out of the blue, to us at least, it was out of the blue, like he wants to buy Greenland. He wants to secure Greenland because he knows, or at least he's being told by his advisors and so forth, and this has been talked about not just by his administration, but by the last 3 or 4 administrations, that global warming is real and that the Arctic is thawing out. But what that's going to do is that's going to start opening up shipping lanes across the North Pole, if that's true. And he wants to be the one that secures Greenland, because he sees not only the rare earth minerals and stuff like that, but and what are your thoughts on just that whole idea? Because we're starting to see they're going to look at it from global warming perspective, which is already we know that the earth might be warming, but it's not being caused because I have an SUV or because cows in the field or whatever. this is going to happen regardless. So I mean, what do you make of this? Is there, let me ask it this way. Is there any tie-ins with what we're talking about in terms of this corrupted history versus the political stuff we're seeing playing out today? It seemed to me there's tie-ins because I showed that slide earlier. That's what the world would look like. And it seems very likely, and this may even challenge my own thoughts about Mystery Babylon being in Iraq, because if the waters are thawing out, that is going to increase the shoreline, and that the places that weren't underwater now are going to be above water, or vice versa, So,
Right. Well, and we were talking about all of this, I think, either earlier today or whenever it was. And look, so Trump is wanting to acquire Greenland. He's also wanting the mineral wealth there, or a certain percentage of that from Ukraine as well, trying to negotiate that whole thing. But the mineral wealth is very important in this time, in this age that we're in right now. I mean, in fact, all of us have our cell phones here. We need these things for our cell phones and for the NVIDIA chips and all of those kinds of things. Data centers that he's wanting to, I forget how many it is right now, but just all across the United States, in order to empower all of these things that he's trying to do, and AI and all of these technologies. And you look at all of those technologies, and I mean, I find it absolutely fascinating and significant at this time, at this stage of the game that we are all in, because look, we see in the Word of God the mark of the beast. My personal opinion is that these technologies are going to be utilized in those things, whether you're talking about the mark of the beast, whether you're talking about the image that's going to appear to come to life, and
global surveillance system.
the global surveillance system, which I think is all interconnected with being able to know who has that mark, who doesn't have that mark in the moment, and in the moment being able to. I mean, you're either able to buy something or not buy something, to buy or sell, whatever it is. And I think all of this is going to be absolutely necessary. So
Trump may not know why he's doing what he's doing, but he's being driven to secure mineral rights for these rare earth minerals that are critical for modern technology, the chips, quantum systems, everything that's going to be tied to a digital one world system.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
I think it's.
And that's what's coming. He's building. We're basically watching the infrastructure, the logistically being built.
We are, and I think there's something. A little side note here to talk about. Listen, folks. None of us are, if you want to call it, apologists for Donald Trump. Okay, we're not saying that by any means. But something that we were talking about earlier today as well, and I like to bring this up as just an illustration for everyone, is when we talk about Gutenberg's printing press. Actually, we were talking about this earlier this morning. We're talking about Gutenberg's printing press, right? Well, listen, Gutenberg had no concept or idea or whatever you want to call it of utilizing the printing press for bringing about pornography. But we know that obviously hundreds of years later, the printing press, or more modern version of that, would be utilized for pornography. Did he have pornography in mind? Well, of course he did. Okay, but we also know that was used for that and all kinds of other things, right? So things that can be used for bad can be also, or things that can be used for good can also be used for bad in the hands of sinful man. And listen, I believe that what Trump is trying to do is he's all about America first. That doesn't mean America only, by the way, but he's about America first and wanting to make this land great again, and the American way of life, and all of that. And take it or leave it, but that's what he's wanting to do. And his plan in doing that isn't to bring about the beast system or any of those things, but by default, I think that we could all possibly agree here that by default, moving ahead at this incredible speed and increasing all of these data centers and And again, like we talk about AI, AGI, ASI, organoid intelligence, and mixing that together with your quantum computing and everything. Listen, you've got to have the infrastructure in which to do those things. And yet the outcome down the road is, I believe that these things are at some point in some degree going to be utilized for the things that we read about in the Word of God. Does that mean that that is the intention of the president? No, not at all. But someone else is going to come around, be it a couple of years or a few years from now, and eventually those things will be be plug and play, I believe.
That technology is going to be hijacked and going to be repurposed. Instead of making America great again, it's going to be make the beast system reality.
That's right. No doubt about it.
Right, right. And when you talk about getting into all of this intelligence technologies and everything, I just wonder, and I think we have to ask, how are demonic entities going to be utilized with those kinds of things? Certainly, we all know that certainly there are individuals that are being manipulated in that way. Okay. We know that many of the technologies that just some of them that we either know about, ones that I'm sure will come to light in the future, from back engineering, going back to whether it be Roswell or whatever, and you've got these technologies that are just absolutely phenomenal. The things that are being done right now. So again, in order to power those things, even for how is that gonna be done, right?
Yeah. Well, I kind of I just had a thought right now, and I'm going to ask Lee this. And I know I don't want to get into the timing necessarily of it, but when Jesus said that as it was in the days of Noah and as it was in the days of Lot, he gives all these kind of like identifiers with that. It was something that struck me is that in the days of Noah, it doesn't say necessarily. It just says in the days of Noah. We know Noah lived before the flood. He lived during the flood. He also lived after the flood.
Yep.
And one of his grandsons, great grandson, I believe, and I don't even know if it's a biological connection to Cush, because when you read Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, Ham had a son, Cush. Cush had a son. He had a bunch of sons, Mizraim, Put, and some others. But then he separates out Nimrod.
Yep.
And we know at the Tower of Babel that that was the only time in human history where one world government truly existed, because all of the peoples, instead of doing what God had asked them to do to spread out and fill the earth, they were congregated there in the plains of Shinar, which I mentioned would be like northern Iraq and northeastern Syria. That was really the only time that humanity has been united by language and by speech, which seems redundant when you read Genesis 11. But when you read into the details of that, it's not just that they all spoke the same language. They had the same idioms, the same ways of thinking, the same ways of doing everything culturally. They had the same mindset. And Nimrod somehow takes advantage of this unity and then co-opts it for himself, right?
Yeah.
Well, then if you think about that one world system that they had, also look at the days of Lot, where I'm going to tie in here, is this the cultural depravity that they had arrived at that point. And this is part and parcel why God both destroyed the world before with the flood, as well as scattering in them at the Tower of Babel. Am I far off on that, or
no? I think there's a lot of truth in that. I've often thought of what the judgment at the Tower of Babel was really involving several things. One of them, there was the breach of the command to go out and fill the entire earth. So they broke that command of the Lord. Another one that was broken is simply basically the moral commandments in general, where they were off into iniquity and sin. But we also had a third problem there, which some people overlook, and that's the problem that's involved with the seed war, the pollution of the human DNA with the Nephilim DNA. So the Lord really had several problems here that you probably could look at it from different angles. But that had to be addressed. And so when he separated the peoples around the world, he not only changed their language, he sent them into different geographical places. And notice it says it changed their language and their tongue. So there wasn't just a change from like German to French, but if you spoke German, there's different dialects. You speak French, there's going to be different dialects. And this fracturing just keeps continuing throughout history. So there's more languages now by a long shot than there were when they were first divided at the Tower of Babel. And the Antichrist spirit of the last days is going to try and bring all the world back under one language. And right now, everything is pointing to the English language as the language of the one world government under the Antichrist. It's been the language of education, the language of commerce, the language of the movies. I mean, even in India, they make some movies that are in English, and if they don't make them in English, they have English subtitles on the movies. And so we're going to the direction of one world government, one world education, one world morality, one world religion, one world music. It's all going in that direction.
I was going to say, it wasn't until I came over here on this trip that I saw advertisements for a new app. And basically, you just take your phone and you point it at a sign. For instance, the sign's written in French, German, Chinese, whatever, and it automatically translates it there for you, whether you're doing for directions or you're ordering off a menu. And it wasn't until this trip that's the first time I saw that. But I've known that there's other apps out there. You can speak into it, whatever your native language is, and you can have it translated in an instant to whatever it is that you want to translate into. So if I'm here and I'm talking to somebody that speaks Gaelic, and I don't speak a word of Gaelic, I don't even know how to say hello or goodbye in that, I could just simply say, hey, how are you? I'm so-and-so, I'm from Texas. Do you know where the restaurant is? Or where the bathroom is? What's the famous Spanish? ¿Dónde está el baño? So you could say that and say, translate it to Gaelic, and then it will read it out. It'll say it out in that perfect dialect to somebody that's not speaking English. And I think that through technology, we have now come back to that time where language is no longer a barrier.
Well, and I've got to say, thinking about that, they're using AI to decipher a lot of these things that they're finding in the hieroglyphics and all of that. I don't know if you guys have seen that as well, which I've thought is rather interesting. So just unlocking all of that as well.
Yeah.
Is this part of the spiritual battle then?
Yeah.
Because if you look at it, that you had the reestablishment of Israel, but you also had the reestablishment of the Hebrew language.
Yes.
Which is kind of like, wait, this is what God's doing.
Right.
And then you get the response, which is through technology. This is what the enemy's trying to do.
Yeah.
Well, like I say, when what God provides, Satan loves to pervert.
Yeah.
Let's I want to shift a little bit here to a little bit more recent times, because it's going to have a tie into everything that we're talking about. And if you go back to around the early 1800s, there's a British guy named Charles Lyell who came up with this idea called uniformitarianism. And basically, it provides a scientific reason to explain a lot of the things they didn't understand. But in doing that, it contradicts what the biblical narrative is of the history of humanity and the history of creation. So one of the things that he presented was that the earth is not 6,000 years old, as many had believed at that time. And that was pretty much the accepted view for the previous 1,000 years. But rather, the earth was millions of years old, and the universe was probably tens of millions of years old. And he kind of left it there at that change happens over very, very long periods of time. It's very slow. And, if you think about the Grand Canyon, they would look at the Grand Canyon and say it took millions of years for this waters to erode the land and eventually get it to where it looks like today. And I'm sure there's places in here like today, we looked at a lot of the stuff on the coastline at Port Rush, where you have part of the cliff there, and then you've got the water that had already eroded away, and now it looks like an elephant trunk, And so that is what Charles Lyell brought up. Well, about 40 to 50 years later, another young man comes along, and his name was Charles Darwin. He comes up with the origin of species theory, or what we'd call Darwinian evolution. and he was using that millions of years as the foundation for human evolution, that we came out of some primordial soup, and that we eventually grew enough body parts or whatever, legs, lungs, etc., crawled up on the land, and then over millions and millions of years, that eventually changed into like a lizard or a bird, and then eventually changed into some kind of ape-like creature that eventually changed into a caveman, and then the caveman changed into what we have modern day man. And because Lyell had provided this gigantic amount of time that this would all take place, one, it's unprovable because we've never seen it. We've never seen it in nature. We don't see species today that are like half cat, half fish, or whatever. There's no interspecies evolution and this is this whole idea of the missing link. They've been looking for the missing link forever. And then from Darwin, we have that his idea was grabbed by his cousin Francis Galton, who then came up with this thing called cultural Darwinism that said that, well, it seems like white people are the most developed, therefore black people are the least developed. That allowed for things like eugenics to come about. Then these are scientific or quasi pseudoscientific ideas that the Nazis grabbed onto, that Planned Parenthood grabbed onto, a lot of different secular atheistic type of organizations grabbed onto to show that some races were more developed than other races. And that therefore gave them the primacy to be able to subjugate people based on their skin color. We're kind of seeing the reverse of it today, but whoever wants to take this, but like it seems like there was, because the church did not get involved, the church did not stand up for biblical truth about our own history of the world and of creation. We kind of just said, well, that's science, that's their thing, we're going to do our thing over here. Yeah. And then eventually this came to a head with the the Scopes trial in the early 20s. That guy was not prepared to go in and argue the case from even from a biblical sense, not even from an academic sense. And that's what's been crammed in public education ever since. Yep. And so kids are growing up today thinking that they are here as a cosmic accident. They have no reason for why they were here. They have no place to go in the future. And when you die, you just, whatever. And that's allowed for all manner of like terrible things to erupt in our society. So whoever wants to jump on that hand grenade, that's.
One thing that comes to mind with me is when you're talking about man, as they want to say, have been around for millions of years, and or the whole evolutionary process, as they like to call it. You got one big issue, and I mean that literally, and the big issue is going to be with the sun, because with the sun, it's losing, and I was curious as to how much it's losing. It's losing currently 4.7 million tons or million metric tons of mass every second of energy, or that's 9.4 billion pounds. Okay. And this is every single second. So what that means, if you reverse engineer that situation, if you would, is the mass of the sun, if you're going back millions of years ago, would be so massive that well, first of all, it would engulf the earth and beyond that, but even if it didn't, okay, but we know that it would, all right, there would not be able to support any kind of life on earth whatsoever. You understand?
Yeah.
Just because of the mass of the sun. So see, the thing that they want to talk about as supposedly benefiting them, which is time, is actually their worst enemy.
Yes.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
imagine if you had a basketball, right? And that's the sun, and this would be the sun hundreds of millions of years ago. I've heard 14 billion. In fact, most scientists today can't agree. When I was in school, the universe was
I heard 12
billion. Yeah, so the number keeps changing as education keeps going along, right? You have a basketball that's the sun, and the Earth would have already been consumed in flames. It would be like where Mercury is today. And life could not grow in that heat.
impossible.
Right. So as every single second, what was it again? How many metric tons?
4.7 trillion.
It's 9.4 billion pounds per second.
So now that basketball is shrinking, and they're saying that somehow the universe is this big, but we also know the sun is burning up this amount of energy and mass every single second. It's shrinking, and we should have by default. I think with the Earth, the sun would have already burned out by now. It would have been at least
another issue too. That's true.
It doesn't
a
fit
red
with
star.
our idea.
Yeah.
So the law of decay, it just doesn't fit with it. And it's the same with a lot of things. Professor John C. Lennox wrote a great book called God's Undertaker. I don't know if you've ever read it. He's from here, but he's a fantastic apologist. And he took the age of the Earth and the age of the universe, and he went around to other scientists. So he would debate the likes of Dawkins and people like that. And still, they agree, they have to attest that the age of the Earth and the age of the solar system would still not give enough time for intelligent life to be evolved.
Yeah.
So the problem is with evolution, certainly, and the thing is, as soon as you say that I don't believe in evolution, people are conflated about what you're actually talking about. It's the difference between micro and macro. So if you're talking about macro evolution, well, no, I got no belief in that whatsoever. The idea of jumping species.
Yeah.
And even when we take it, the fossil records, or people talking about the missing link, every time there's been a missing link so-called found, then what they've later found is there's either been willful corruption in the finding, or it's been gaudy science.
Yes.
Like, they have the jawbone of an ox and, the head of a monkey, and they say,
Pigs
oh,
too.
look,
Right.
put
Yeah.
those two together. And the problem is that you have to have more faith to believe in the likes of macroevolution. Now, do I believe that, if you're living in America or living in Texas, that you will be more tanned than me?
Yeah.
And more adjusted to the sun? Yeah, that's microevolution. That's being adapted to your surroundings.
Right.
But what Darwin did, and everybody gives Darwin all of this sort of accolade, oh, well, he was such a smart man. Well, what was his degree in? It was in theology.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like he was a peer, right? And we completely would disagree with his findings. But again, I would say his findings were sort of provocated off the fact of losing a daughter, but also with Charles Darwin, there are records of him attending seances.
Yes.
So and his interest in theosophy. So
And the occult and whatnot.
yeah. So
Dark
therefore,
man.
that shows me the agenda.
Or
You look
dark
at
man.
the same time, 24th of November, 1859, Origin of Species gets released. You have around about the same time, probably about 10 to 15 years later, you have Madame Blavatsky and all of her publications being accepted across the board in certainly esoteric societies, the likes of the Lucius Trust and all Lucius Publication and Lucifer
Alice
being,
Bailey and all
yeah,
that.
and all of that. All of this gets accepted, and I think it's all connected. If I turn around to you and I say, you're not specially created, there's no purpose to your life, like you were saying with any kid or teenager, no purpose to your life. Well, what's the next step? You go, well, life is meaningless. Well, if life is meaningless, I may as well be my own God.
Yep.
And that's the plan that we're seeing. And it's the plan that we're seeing unfold.
Yeah. If you listen to Jeffrey Dahmer's, he did an interview right before he was killed in prison back in the 90s. He was asked by Stone Phillips on 60 Minutes in that interview, why did you kill people and you eat them and do these terrible things? And his answer verbatim was, well, I grew up in a Christian home, I'll put that in air quotes. They were religiously Christian.
Yeah.
He goes, but I believed in evolution. I believed that we had no rhyme or reason for why we were here, and that when we died, we blank off into nothing. So why not? Why not live whatever fantasy, whatever crazy thing I want to do now? Why not do it? And that was his whole reasoning, because he bought into this lie. And take Dahmer, multiply that by tens of billions of people today, or tens of millions of people today all around the world who are also buying into this idea. And that's why we're seeing a resurgence in neo-paganism. We're seeing a resurgence in the occult and all the esoteric beliefs. And not only that, but when you let me dovetail this into this thought, and I'll kind of connect it here. Darwin was able to publish The Origin of Species, even with a theological degree, based off of what he considered science was simply observation. A monkey kind of looks like a human, therefore we must have a common ancestor.
Yeah.
But had his Origin of Species come out in, say, 1960, about 10 years after we discovered DNA, his ideas would have been laughed out of the room, because DNA, the genetics, and how incredibly complex we are made up through the genome or human genome. We have more in connection with a banana than we do with an ape. Believe it or not, we do genetically. And I've heard this many times from many different sources. But my thing is, he came up with this idea at a time when science was not yet mature enough to challenge that, and that just became the accepted standard by everything that was measured after that, and that was forced into public education and the public seminary, or not seminaries, universities. And so his idea was half baked. Now here's where things get a little weird. By the time the mid 20th century was around, and by the time we discovered DNA, belief in Darwinian evolution started to wane, because they realized scientifically it was impossible.
Yeah.
And nowadays you'll finally hardly find any scientist worth his salt that really truly believes in that anymore, because they know genetically it's impossible, right? And so now what comes in to fill that void is ancient aliens. Oh, it was some higher form that came from the space. Right. Our space brothers came and seeded the planet.
Yep.
Millions of years ago, and that's how we came. So what are your thoughts on ancient aliens seeding the planet, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, it's interesting that it's not merely something that's being postulated as a possible theory by the scientific community today, or at least some quarters of the scientific community, because you're able to trace back in history and you discover that every major culture in ancient history had the gods coming down to man.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Giving them art, giving them cosmetology, that cosmetics, giving them agriculture, advanced agriculture, giving them science and technology, giving them all kinds of gifts. This is Greek, Roman mythology, Sumerian mythology, Egyptian mythology, Aztec and Inca mythology, Norse mythology. Everybody has this. So what's fascinating about this is you take the next step from here. We go in the Bible and we read in Genesis chapter 6 about the sons of God coming down to men. Now there we don't get the full story. We get the part that concerns the redemption plan of God. Yeah. And that part is the defilement of the human DNA, which is going to mess with the messianic promises. But you go to the secular stuff and you'll see that they have how it affected them. And for them, it was science and art. And this God class became the rulers all around the world. Yeah. So when white man first went to South America, what did they discover? They found people there who believed that someday white men with blue eyes, blonde hair, and red beards would return. Why did they have that? Because that's what their God kings were, and their God kings told them that they would return.
Yeah. It is. If you go back to Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, any of the ancient cults and even the modern day cults, there is this desire to return to the golden age, right? Yeah. The golden age of humanity was that time before the flood, the antediluvian generations that intermingled with these fallen angels that we see there in Genesis 6, the sons of God, and something in them, whether it's the secret knowledge, secret societies have kept this alive for many hundreds of years. Ancient religions, ancient cults have kept this idea alive that man can attain some type of demigod status or immortality. And what we couldn't achieve through alchemy, what we couldn't achieve through magic and through seances, whatever, we are now being able to do that through modern technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, it's any number of things, anti-aging technologies. Here's what's interesting to me is that you got guys like Peter Thiel Jeff Bezos, many others, probably Elon Musk, that will willingly admit, and they'll say this scientifically, that it is humanly possible for humans to live for hundreds of years. They can look at the DNA, they can look at the human genome and say that yes, humans should theoretically be able to live for hundreds and hundreds of years. So what's causing our decline? And they can go in now through DNA, through artificial intelligence, through gene editing technologies like CRISPR, and they can say, well, if you take this gene out, this is what's been transferred from generation to generation, and this is the cancer. I'm just going to call it the cancer gene, or the leukemia gene, or the this gene. And they say, what if we take those things out? Then that should extend human life. Now multiply that, by the thousands to individuals. And through artificial intelligence, now that we're getting to that point where we're quickly, and Patrick Wood was saying that he thinks that we may hit AGI relatively soon. I mean, sooner than we think, right? And that is going to be something that you can, and just remember what Trump talked about with Project Stargate, or not Trump, it was, who did he have with him? He had Larry Ellison and this other guy, this Japanese guy, I can't remember his name, but what did Ellison talk about? He talked about using this Project Stargate to rapidly advance artificial intelligence so that it can be used for medical purposes.
Well, and Elon, well, first of all, I think it's an initial 100 million, if I remember correctly, that goes then to 400, right? 400 million. And you've got Elon Musk that has talked about initially what he said with Neuralink is that Neuralink, hey, you know what? If we can help someone who doesn't have functionality in their arm, or whatever it might be, or their eye, or something else like that, to and what he is experiencing over a couple of people that they've done this with right now is that there are improvements, but he said originally that was going to be used for those people, but then he said maybe 9 months to a year ago, well, I wouldn't mind being hooked up to that myself. I think he's trying to allow obviously the technologies of this to continue to develop. But what he's actually talking about now is not just for those who maybe they're blind or maybe they're deaf or medical necessities, but to literally augment man in general, right? Because the desire is for man to be as gods. And so it's absolutely incredible to watch all of this unfold right now. The technologies for this, they are seeing certain interesting developments with all of this as well. And so what does this do on the spiritual side of things is, well, what do we need, your God for? We don't need some God over there that we worship. Our desire is to actually be that God ourselves. You can be as gods, and so it's a scary message that's being put out there. I guess
it is.
It really is.
Yeah. So this idea of anti-aging technologies that Musk, Thiel, Ellison, and others, and these guys are multi-billionaires. I mean, Musk is the richest guy on the planet, and you're right. He did say initially it would be for medical necessity, but now it seems like he's going to be using it for commercialization. He wants to market some product that will augment a person so that once artificial intelligence hits that singularity moment, or it hits that moment where it hits artificial superintelligence, that we aren't going to be left behind. We aren't going to be the Neanderthals anymore. We're going to be peers with these new AI gods, if you will. And so that to me is troubling, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. We know the Bible tells us it's going to happen because by Revelation 13, by the world of Revelation, by the time the world gets to the world of Revelation 13, this is going to be a reality where people are having to take some kind of a mark. We don't know what that technology is just yet. And here's the thing. We don't know what it is just yet, not because it doesn't exist, but because there's so many different kinds. Right. We don't know which of those kinds is going to be the one that they take forward and go. I kind of lean toward the quantum dot tattoo, but we're using nanoparticles and stuff to once you put that on your skin, You have a quantum system, and Microsoft just came out with this news article just within the last week or so, where they've created a fourth kind of matter that is going to be used to house quantum qubits in things as small as a microchip. And so what is this fourth thing? So you have liquids, solids, and gases. Well, they came up with some kind of a jelly, I don't know, topological type of, I don't know what it is, but it's some type of a jelly, and inside that jelly is where the qubits would go, and they could put hundreds of millions of qubits inside of this thing.
Yeah.
Now, if you're able to take that and put that into some type of a chip, like one of those really fast NVIDIA chips or whatever, merge those two technologies together, and then you put that in some type of a medical device, and that thing is released to your body through nanoparticles all the time. It's just constantly releasing it. I mean, if we thought what happened in 2020 with the jab was bad, I think the jab was simply just laying out the logistics of how to do this on a global scale.
Right.
But this thing that's coming is going to fundamentally, in my opinion, and this is just me, you guys are free to disagree with me, but I think it's going to change the human genome so that person is no longer human.
I agree.
And why did Christ come? He came to die for mankind.
That's right.
Right. But this goes into the other thing too, Pete, where how is it or why is it that someone, for example, that could like a Jeffrey Dahmer or what we would consider the worst of the worst that are out there,
Hitler.
just the right, Hitler or whatever, the most heinous of crimes, yet can be saved. Okay, but those that receive the mark will not be able to be saved.
That's right.
How is that? What is so different? Let's face it, the majority of those that are going to receive the mark, probably the 99 point whatever percentile of those receiving the mark wouldn't even come close to a Jeffrey Dahmer, an Adolf Hitler, Chairman Mao, or whomever.
Yeah.
And yet, if they would have asked through faith to receive the Lord Jesus as Lord and Savior, they could be saved. But yet these individuals cannot be saved. And one of the things that it makes me think of as well is when the Israelites were told in the conquest of Canaan to go into the land, and certain areas, certain people groups that they went into, they were told, look, you must utterly destroy every man, woman, child, animal. You cannot take the gold. You cannot take one single thing with you. Everything has to be utterly destroyed. And I kind of connect this as well, because why is it? Why did some have to be utterly destroyed like that, even down to the children, and some not? Well, I think this goes back to where we originally began today, is those that have been infiltrated, whatever you want to call it, by Nephilim seed.
Yeah.
Okay. See, there are those that were irredeemable back then as well. Okay. And they had to be absolutely wiped out, just like Goliath and all of that, So now we fast forward to now, and what is one of the pathways of the enemy, and I'm not going to say that this is the only pathway, but one of the pathways of the adversary is to try and through science, the medical field and whatnot, to try and change man from being fully man. And if you can change man from being fully man, how do you redeem that individual? Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on this?
Well, first thought is I'm going to go in just a second because I've got to get you to the airport and transport. But I will. Look, I think the whole thing is it's kind of like what I was talking about on Saturday. There is an agenda, and the agenda is to bring things around in one circle, and the one circle is the Nephilistic cycle, right? If you look at what Lee was bringing up about those different things that were taught from cosmetics and stuff, and astrology or astronomy and all of those, they fall into what was called the 7 sacred sciences. And the 7 sacred sciences are what we would identify as what the Watchers taught the humanity, but it's what the likes of the Masonic talk about in terms, and the occult talk about in terms of to create that, I guess, esoteric, set apart human being. And that, I think that's something ingrained, not in the heart, but in the flesh, right? That man wants to be the best they can be. They want to reach this next level, whether that's through knowledge or whether that's through integration between technology and biologics and being some kind of superhuman. But it's never stopped from Genesis chapter 4. It has continued onward, that man is sought, excuse me, to be that, to be their own God. So you have Genesis 3, the promise of that from the enemy, and then, you know, that being rebuked. But you've seen this continue, and it's so in, like, that's what I was trying to teach, sort of bring out in Saturday. It's so in your face. If you take the Third Reich to the idea of the Fourth Reich, and that the Third Reich never disappeared, that you had the things like the Norman Circle. And when I was talking about the Norman Circle, I just touched on that. But Wiener Neumann was at top level, like Joseph Goebbels' second in command. And he lived way past being a pensioner. He lived into his old age. He became one of the biggest business owners in Germany at that time. But in 1953, he tried to rejoin government. And it was all based on that Ariosophy, the idea of creating that superhuman race again. Yeah. And he had a following. He had a following. He had a following because so many, you know, he was told, because one of the things that came off the back of Nuremberg trials, you could never stand for parliament again. You never stand for government again. Mm. And when they found out, oh, hold on a minute, you're a top level Nazi, he was arrested, and he was going to be prosecuted. And then it turned out that 77% of High Court judges in 1953 were off the Nazi party. So they all said, no, he's our friend, let's let him go. In fact, let him start up and become one of the major industry leaders in Germany at that time. But he continued that ethos through. The same with Heinrich Himmler. Himmler was a devout Ariosophy believer, right? He believed that, you know, it wasn't just, so he sent members of the SS out in secret missions to find the Assisi documents that proved of the German super race status, to go and search this out. So there was a whole operation by the SS in Italy to search out a document that would support this. And it was all this belief that, look, you know, we are the super race, we are this. But then when you get to it, right, you talked about Nephilim, and you talked about the likes of, you know, what they used to believe. We knew that they believed in, certainly in the intertestamental belief, they believed in Nephilim magic. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between Nephilim magic and modern day technology? You take the technology of today and you apply it to someone who doesn't know that technology.
They call it magic.
They call it magic. Mm-hmm. And that's what I believe. It's the same old thing. And that's why, you know, in the Hebrew, prophecy is pattern. It's not so much prediction. It's the pattern of things to continue until the crescendo of the fulfillment of it. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to make my way out because I cannot last any longer. I'm exhausted.
All right, bro.
I'm this close.
I know. I can see it.
I've had like 3 cups of coffee tonight, so I think
I don't know how you do it. Right?
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, you like you didn't sleep last night, but you're still up and you're still going and going and going. And then you've got a 4:30. I'll be here, I think. Yeah. 4:30 in the morning.
All right.
So, like, I'll see you guys in the morning.
Good night.
All right.
See you.
All right, brother.
God bless. God bless.
Okay, so Gary brought up some really, really interesting ideas, especially if you've ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, the movie. We know the Nazis were obsessed with esoteric beliefs. They were obsessed with the black sun, the power of the black sun, that they thought they tap into this kind of spiritual domain. They were obsessed with ancient religious artifacts like the Ark and many other things. They were also obsessed with this idea of Atlantis.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
it's say that as I'm going.
Yeah. Sorry. You know what? I'll save that for another time. They were obsessed with Atlantis. They thought that even Hibernia, which is what we would call Ireland today, was key to finding this place, that it was somewhere in the north. We know about Atlantis only primarily, I think, through Plato. Plato was one of the guys that wrote about it, back in the BC times. And it certainly makes sense if you look at the flood. And I don't know what your thoughts are, particularly on Pangea, or the idea that the land, the earth, was all in one place at that time, the land mass, and during the flood, not only did the water come down from above, but also from beneath the earth, and it kind of broke things apart. And things that were up high were now lowered, and things that were low were raised up, like the mountain ranges, etc., the Andes, the Himalayas, the Rocky Mountains, etc. It seems to me that there was a re-terraforming of the world to such a degree that by the time Noah's Ark landed, they probably didn't recognize anything, and they were probably scared to go out, and that's contributed to them just kind of congregating in one location, because everything was so different now, at least for the sons and the daughters-in-law.
Right.
Yeah.
But what the sons and the daughters of Noah did is they shared all the stories about what life was like before the flood. That gets captured in mythology. That gets captured in this belief systems that eventually becomes part of the culture, and then that becomes part of the religion. And even today, I mean, you've got this is a very simplistic comparison, but we've got people now trying to start a religion on the Jedis, which comes from a science fiction movie that it happened in my lifetime. Same thing with Scientology. Scientology was created by a science fiction writer, L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how many people are in it, but tens of thousands of people believe in Scientology.
A lot of Hollywood does.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people believe in this Jedi religion, but it's something that's in culture that people that they go quickly to embrace it, and they lionize it and deify this idea. And next thing you know, if we were to be here for another generation, I guarantee you there would be churches, Jedi churches on corners, street corners.
To be honest with you, it was, I want to say, maybe a few years ago now. I think it was right before COVID, and I had seen, I don't remember where I'd seen it now, but a church that actually was doing Star Wars nativity scenes. I mean, can you imagine Star Wars nativity scenes? Getting back though to what you were saying a couple minutes ago, if you take the Earth and you flatten the Earth out and just spread it out to look at it as a flat map.
Flat Earth.
Oh yeah, no such thing. Let's not go there again. We already had this discussion earlier.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and you look at that just for the sake of looking at it in one photo there.
Snapshot.
Or a snapshot, right? And the volcanic activity that is going to raise the mountains and all that. But when you flatten out the Earth like that, it's interesting because you look at it and it all fits together perfectly as a puzzle.
Yeah.
As one big piece. I mean, it really does. It's just perfectly fits together there. And I believe everything completely changed, obviously, as a result of the flood. But anyhow, so
I do think there were some aspects of Pangea that could have happened during the flood while the Earth was underwater, under the deluge there. But I also think that before the flood, it was probably pretty flat. You would have hills and things like that. But after the flood, I mean, you had massive geological and geographical changes to where things used to be and where things are then, at the time. You got to think about Noah's Ark lands in the top of these mountains, right? And comes to rest in these mountains. And I don't know, you've been to Mount Ararat before. I know we've got brothers in the prophecy community circles that do a lot of archaeology, Randall Price and others that have been to Mount Ararat, and it's like 14,000 feet up. I mean, can you imagine coming off the Ark and you're having a hard time breathing because of the atmosphere? It's not as rich as it used to be. There's not as much oxygen. The air's thinner. And so they would have made their way down to a lower portion, but they're not going to, in my opinion, they weren't going to pass a very fertile, flat, dry land and keep going further south into the swampy marshes to go build some kind of tower. That to me defies human logic. It defies common sense. And they would have settled in the first kind of reasonably hospitable place that would have allowed for them to build houses, farm, etc. And the fact that Göbekli Tepe is just like a stone's throw away, and that is the right now that is the oldest archaeological site that we know of. The problem is that they're not looking at Göbekli Tepe from a Noahic ark experience or a Genesis perspective. They're looking at it from a human secular perspective, that the universe is billions of years old, the Earth is tens of millions of years old, and that we came here, we're some kind of a cosmic accident.
Right.
And now that Darwinian evolution doesn't prove their agenda, they have to flip the script. And now they're saying, well, it's not Darwinian evolution. Really, it's ancient aliens came and seeded the planet. And that idea would have been laughed out of the room in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Sure.
But then once we discovered DNA, now the whole Darwinian evolution thing falls apart. And again, I believe in microevolution. I believe that there is changes within a species can happen. So if you take two different kinds of dogs, and you breed them together, they might have 4 brown puppies and 4 white puppies, or black and white or whatever, spotted. And then you take those and you can breed them, and before you know it, you've got Chihuahuas, you've got German Shepherds, you've got wolves, because within the canine genome, they were allowed for all of these different types of changes and structures to occur, just like within the human's genome.
Right.
Adam and Eve, I don't think Adam was white and Eve was black or brown or whatever. I think they were both probably brown, but within their genome, they had every kind of a possibility that you could have, and then that was further exacerbated at the Tower of Babel.
And just like hair color or eye color,
Yeah, exactly.
any of those kinds of things would apply.
Yeah, absolutely. Thoughts, Lee?
Yeah.
Then you're tired.
Yeah, no,
Maybe I needed to have a few coffees. Like
I'm gonna have trouble sleeping now.
yeah. Well, I just, just kind of summing up some of the things we're talking about. We definitely have this problem of the dispersion, which is now man's trying to overcome the dispersion. We have the communication problem, which man is trying to overcome. We have the fact that God has divided us up into different areas, so science has a harder time connecting. We have man is, because of the curse, or lifespans are being reduced. This is trying to overcome this entire problem, to increase man's lifespan, interconnectability between the scientists, now enhanced and augmented by supercomputers, by quantum computing. This is going to be a tremendous revolution that's coming man's way. It's going to be a quantum leap for mankind. It's going to make the Industrial Revolution look like playing with Legos.
Yeah. And the last thing that we didn't talk about today that I wanted to kind of briefly cover, and I'll do this, and I don't know how comfortable you guys are with this topic, but there's been a lot on TikTok and Instagram and other kind of social media platforms on this idea called the mud flood theory and Tartaria. And I want to address this because I did touch on it earlier with brother Gary. Like, for example, the Irish people were incredible chronologists in keeping track of their history as a people, to the point that they could even trace their lineages that differentiates between the Irish people coming from Magog and the Welsh Celts, the Irish Celts coming from Magog, the Welsh Celts coming from Gomer, which were sons of Japheth, to that degree. And they've been incredible in terms of how they've kept their history recorded over, even today,
I was just thinking of that,
castle.
going to right. Or what was it, the Giant's Causeway, and all the different things that were being discussed was like absolutely incredible.
So, but here's the problem: is that not every culture did that.
Right.
You have a lot of the cultures that we would call the barbarians that roamed Central Europe or Europe in general, mainland Europe, and then Central Asia, etc. That became very nomadic. They didn't have a written history. Everything was kind of passed down through oral tradition. And so it's incredibly difficult to trace where those peoples come from. Now, 5th century Greek historian, they call him the father of history, Herodotus, was a Greek historian back in the 4th, 5th century. He traveled all around like the Black Sea and all around where the Greeks were at, and was looking at the different peoples, trying to get a history recorded of all the different people groups that were out there. The problem is that so much of those people groups didn't keep a written record of the history of their peoples. And to me, the idea of Tataria, which kind of is lumped into basically all of Russia and the Stan countries today, is that it's kind of like if you think back to the ancient mariners, the maps of the sea, of the oceans, the places that they knew, they were pretty good at recording like the coastlines and stuff. But when you get out too far where they really weren't comfortable traveling, they just put like a little sea serpent there and it says, "Here there be monsters," right? And that, I see that as the same way with Tartaria and this idea that there was this massive land empire culture, whatever. They just labeled it Tartaria. And then we don't know a whole lot about that. So we begin to put this modern we impose this modern kind of theories onto what wasn't really there. So in the sense that we're trying to create these like massive empires that never really existed because we don't have a written history for these people because they didn't keep written histories. That's this whole idea of Tartaria. Now, was there a place called Tartaria? I mean, in Syria, there's a place called Tartarus. We know that there probably was places called Tartaria, but they weren't like these massive empires that dominated and just that we're trying to suppress history. That's not really. I mean, you can't suppress wasn't there. Really, it's just coming up with these ideas of trying to embellish the past with these grandiose historical fictions that never really existed.
Well, that's like what Mahmoud Abbas's and some others, by the way, have tried to do regarding the Palestinian people too, is embellish the past and say, well, we're the descendants of the Canaanites, and I've even heard a little bit there of the Jebusites, but they pretty much, for the most part, they stick to the Canaanites and everything, and we talked about that the other night too.
And I hadn't heard that, but I just I can see why they're trying to do that. They're trying to rewrite history.
They're trying to predate the Israelites being in the land, saying, "Look, we're there all the way back to then. You guys came in; it belonged to us all along."
But then, if you think about even if they were Canaanites, thinking about how Noah partitioned the land to his sons, he gave basically what would be Israel all the way through to Afghanistan. That was supposed to be for Shem.
Yep.
And those are the Semitic peoples that we see in the Middle East today. Japheth was supposed to take to the north, and then Cush was supposed to take what is now Africa. And if you look at Cush, his sons of Mizraim, which is modern day Egypt, the Egyptians still refer to themselves as Mizraim.
Mm-hmm.
They refer to themselves as that. Put, it's just modern day North Africa from Libya all the way over through Tunisia and Algeria and probably Morocco. And you can see that from then, modern day civilizations like Carthage would arise and challenge the Romans. And then who were the Ethiopians? What were they called? There was Put and Cush was what we would consider Ethiopia and South, more of the sub-Saharan Africa type places. And who is the only one that's not there? Canaan. Canaan is up in Shem's land, right? Canaan should have been down into what is Africa, but Canaan settled in what was supposed to be Shem's territory. And so he is technically a squatter from ancient historical records. And if you want to look at it that way, if they want to claim they're Canaanites, then that wasn't their land anyways. So that wasn't the land that Noah gave them.
That's right.
Now, we have the last thing is this idea of the mud flood. I'm not super versed on it, but it's basically this idea that when you go around really old towns, even in places like in America, etc., where you have a street and then you have like the windowsill, like you just have like the top of the windowsill, right? And we're like, why do you have that kind of architecture built into a building when it's at street level and you can't even look out of that window because you're just getting to the top of the arch, etc.? And then you look around the world where this is kind of commonplace. Well, it's not uncommon for a lot of modern cities to build up from previous generations. I think I read here in Ireland, in Belfast, that there was at a time, they had two different pictures that were shown. One was where there was a highway that was just on top like a normal highway would be. It kind of raised and elevated off the ground because of the water, the river, etc., made through bridges and stuff. And then they went back and they put that highway underground. I don't know, I can't remember exactly where this is done, but they put the highway underground. So now the highway is subterranean, and then above that is like a football pitch or something, some soccer field or park or whatever.
Mhm.
So it's not uncommon for cultures to build up or build down, elevate streets or lower streets because of the way that modern buildings were going up, and the railways and subways and all the other kind of stuff that we've done. That happens all around the world. The other part of this is that they believe that if you look back at older pictures of big cities like I'm thinking of major capitals in mainland Europe, in Hungary and Poland and other places, Russia, Lithuania, and in these massive cities, it seems like there is a the architecture there was vastly superior to what we have today. When we look back, I don't know if you remember this from the Titanic Museum, but the place, I think the company was called Harold and something, Wolf or something.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that did the design for the Titanic. But when you look at the picture, I mean, they're in this office building working. There's this massive curved ceiling in there. I mean, it was beautiful the way that they designed the structures there. I think that was just indicative of the times that they were in, and whether you're in the Romantic period, the Georgian period, or some other type of period of time where you build buildings in a particular fashion because it's aesthetically appealing to
Mhm.
the people that were going to be working there,
Mhm.
and the technology that was available at the time. I can't find anywhere in history where there was a massive mud flood. I don't even know when and where, but that would have been recorded all over the place in different chronicles from the Chinese, from the Indians, from the Africans, from the Egyptians, so
Right.
on and so forth. They would have recorded this massive event like a massive flood. So to me, I never really got the mud flood theory, but I would not put any kind of stock in it. Just know that throughout history, whether we're talking about the Renaissance period, the age of reason, et cetera, different architectural styles will come forth, and you can see those all over the world. I mean, if you go to Greece, been to Santorini, Greece. All the buildings there are whitewashed. I mean, painted brilliant white,
Mhm.
and they have this blue, really beautiful blue on there,
Right.
and it's appealing to the
Mhm.
coastline there, and that was something that they built there. But you don't find that same architecture on the other side, on the North African side, or even in Israel and other
Mhm.
places. That was kind of just unique to that area. That doesn't mean that there was an ancient culture there that was completely destroyed by some flood, like a mud flood, and they built on top of that. But there has been times where places have flooded, and they have to rebuild cities. I mean, look at North Carolina. Look at the Smoky Mountains right now that have been in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. That did so much damage just in a matter of days that they've had to restructure a lot of they're going to have to rebuild a lot of how that is, or whether you're talking about the fires in Lahaina, or you're talking about the wildfires in California. They're going to rebuild. It's not going to look exactly the same as it was before. I know that's not what people that lost houses in their thought, but it's going to be fiscally and financially impossible that if you had a house in, say, Los Angeles County that was burnt down in the Palisades, and that house, when you built it, cost you $30,000 back in the 1960s, now that house is worth, $2 million or whatever. The insurance is not going to repay for that. They're going to resettle you somewhere else and say, hey, this is going to be a new 15-minute smart city or whatever. So the fact that we build in different styles and structures, I don't think that lends any credence at all to the mud flood theory. Um, but the whole idea of mud flood Tataria is it's really trying to insert doubt into the historical narrative that we kind of know as a general truth. That's not just recorded by American schools or by Russian schools, but by all the different cultures. And I will admit that if you go to a history class in China, communist China today, they're going to present history from a Chinese communist perspective. I get that. But they're not going to necessarily deny that 9/11 happened, or they're not going to deny that World War II happened, or they're
Mhm.
not going to deny that the Titanic sank. They are going to put their spin on it,
Yeah.
but they're not going to deny that the event actually didn't happen. Nor is this idea that we're missing 3 centuries during the Dark Ages because one pope wanted to start the Holy Roman Empire on an even year or whatever, and therefore he had to fast forward humanity 300 years in order. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but if that were true, we would see that in the historical records from all around the world, that the Europeans said, "Hey, we're going to just fast forward 300 years," and we would see that reflected in other cultures, and we say, "Okay, that's where this is coming from."
Yep.
Just like we see changes in the calendars, whether we went from the every culture had their own kind of religious calendar, a lunar or solar calendar. We went to in the 1st century BC to a Julian calendar. And in the 15th century, we went to a Gregorian calendar. And I get it. Like the Muslims have their own calendar, the Chinese have their calendar. But if you're a Chinese businessman and you're working with an American company for Apple or for whatever, you're not going to go off of the date that you date your empire back from. You're going to go with the date on the business side of it and the money side of it. You're going to go with the year that everybody in the world accepts. This is the year 2025,
Right.
So that's kind of the standard calendar that everybody uses. If there were missing 300 years, we would all know that. Like this would be pretty apparent across cultures. So,
right. Well, deception rules the day.
It does.
I mean, I think deception is involved in, if not all, then the majority of what we've talked about this evening. And the enemy is the master deceiver, and we know that he comes to kill, steal, and destroy.
He's a liar from the beginning.
He's a liar. He's a master liar. He's been at this a long time. He's got a lot of time in recorded history.
But here, why would he want to confuse people, especially in this late hour? What purpose does it serve for him to confuse people about where we are in time?
Right. Well, obviously to bring a seed of doubt to the message and the testimony of the cross, and to what we're saying, to the authenticity of the Word of God. And if you can just create so much. I've heard it already. I don't know if you guys have. In your comments or in emails and different things like this, but there's so much. There are those that are I don't want to say in our chats. I don't know if I've seen it in the chats, but in the comment sections, things like that, where they're just like throwing their hands up at times, like, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I'm done. I'm out. They've done that over rapture stuff I've seen over the past couple of years as well. And they're just like, you know what, whatever, I'm done. And I think that's what the enemy wants. The enemy wants to just sow such a degree of a seed of doubt and of confusion, where by the time everyone's done, they're just all up like a pretzel. They don't know what to believe anymore. And that's going to be easy to happen, guys. If we don't keep the main thing, the main thing is always Jesus Christ and the centrality of the written Word of God. And if we get away, if we get off base from those things, then it'll be easy to be able to believe any wind of doctrine or anything that comes out there. We know that the enemy is going to come with these lying signs and wonders, where he's going to make things that seem like they are not things that are not correct seem as though they are correct. Things that it's just going to be very deceptive. And I mean, all of this UFO and alien stuff and everything. Hey guys, I mean, I believe that something is happening, that something is going on, but it's not what they're saying is going on, and that's another tactic of the enemy as well, because he loves to bring just enough of lie to introduce into wherever there is truth. And I think that's one of the most deceptive things.
Or just enough truth in a lie.
Or just enough truth in a lie, yeah.
To make it acceptable.
Right,
right.
Either way it is. And it seems to work pretty well for him. So.
And to Lee, would you agree with this idea that if you're Satan, you've seen Israel come back as a nation again in 1948. You've seen everything that, Israel didn't come back as a nation in a vacuum. And you had World War I, you had World War II, you had all the agreements between the Europeans, et cetera, et cetera. But isn't it interesting that just as we come into this age of information, where information more information is accessible to more people at any time in human history, that we also have the most confusion about where we are and when we are in time and how close we are to the return of Christ. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Oh, it absolutely is. And we see the prep work. For instance, back in the 1830s, when the pre-tribulation rapture and dispensationalism was first being clearly enunciated and disseminated, in that same era, we had two of the most potent false religions that have eschatology teachings come out: Seventh-day Adventists and the Watchtower. Oh, the Mormons. So there's three of them.
Yeah, three.
So all at the same time, or within a few decades of each
I would
other.
even include Darwinism as a human secular belief system.
Yeah, and so we had a whole bunch of stuff. So God, the truth of God starts coming out, and then the enemy's errors come out in a pack. Well, we see the same thing in our day now. There's a growing interest in the world in the last days and apocalyptic stuff, not necessarily from a biblical perspective, just because it's in the air. It's in the movies, it's in science fiction.
Yeah.
The news cycles.
Even the news cycles are presenting, global warming, the end of the world as we know it. So in this mix, we have a small percentage of people teaching the Bible. We have a large percentage of people coming out with a dozen permutations of the error from a scientific perspective, dozens of permutations from the media. We have new religions coming up. We have new versions of religion. We have conspiracy theories out the wazoo.
Ad infinitum. I mean, you could throw this at. I mean, it's coming from everywhere.
And so the person that comes to the table today to try and grapple with the biblical truth, really the encouragement that we can give them is, folks, only listen to those that are teaching clearly from the Bible, and be a Berean. Study the scriptures yourselves.
Yeah.
Really go after them and just shut down any source that's not actually corroborating the Bible or a help to the Bible. Just shut it down and walk away.
Yeah.
Now, based on saying that, there may be those that are watching this right now that may be thinking, okay, then why are you talking about aliens? Why are you talking about these megaliths?
Yeah.
Why are you talking about? And I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
I got the answer in my head, but who wants to go for it? You want to go for that?
I think that there are strangeness and oddities, and there are very bizarre things, mysteries in the world that as a church and as a body of believers we have to contend with. They're there. The megalithic structures at Göbekli Tepe. I think it's important for us, if we do our due diligence, to show and to demonstrate that I think has been done already, that there is a correlation between Noah's flood, the ark resting on Ararat, where the Tower of Babel is, and the proximity to that, to say Göbekli Tepe, that now that answers that time frame. It answers the when, because it seems to be around the time just after the flood.
Yeah. And so
instead of not dealing with it
Yeah.
and letting some other Graham Hancock or some other non-believer come up with his own theories, and then he gets the public podium to shout these theories out to everybody, and everybody starts believing it because we're not challenging it.
And we challenge it, and we give a biblical perspective to these things.
Yeah.
And that's what the enemy doesn't want. So when we discuss these things, when we talk about these things, we're trying to give that perspective so that people aren't fooled by the lies and by the deception and all that's out there. And I think that's what makes this so important, to have these discussions.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
If we start following the biblical framework, what we're going to discover is we start trying to harmonize what we see in ancient history, what we see in archaeology, what we see in the petroglyphs with the biblical record. I think what we're going to discover, and I think if creation scientist type mentality and archaeologists go down this path, they're going to be coming to much larger agreement. We have the archaeological evidence for a worldwide flood, and it's going to harmonize, and the geological evidence will harmonize with the biblical account of flood. At the time of the Tower of Babel, it harmonizes with everything in ancient history and archaeology that deals with the end of the Golden Age. We have in the biblical account, we have the time of Sodom, Gomorrah, and Abraham. Everything in ancient history and archaeology
Absolutely.
that lines up with the Silver Age. We have the Exodus in the Bible that lines up in ancient history and ancient archaeology with the end of the Bronze Age. Now, when we come to the end of the Bronze Age, there was fire that fell from Scandinavia all the way down to Central Africa, deep into Asia, and into North America. And so we have, there's scientific terms for it. We'll just call it the burn layer. In much of America, this burn layer is from just a few inches thick to a couple feet thick.
Mhm.
In the Middle East and in Africa, this burn layer can be up to 3 meters thick, even though it's usually between a couple feet and a meter to a meter and a half thick.
Mhm.
And this is the destruction at the end of the Bronze Age.
Mhm.
And you just keep working forwards with that. Everything is actually harmonizing with the Bible. Another principle, every impact crater on the planet is post-flood.
Yeah.
So when we start putting this into the biblical timeline, and then of course there's different archaeological groups that will show you, listen, if you understand Egyptian history properly, it melds right into the biblical timeline. And there's dozens of different sources you can go to, get the information, and it fits the Bible timeline.
Absolutely. And so that's why we talk about these things, because we want to bring clarity from a biblical perspective and have answers, ready answers for these seeming mysteries that are now being commercialized across social media, across in academia, and all across the spectrum of the human conversation. We need to make sure that we have a ready answer for those
Amen.
things, and not just a ready answer, but a reasonably, scientifically, and historically accurate, or at least as close as we can come to an accurate answer. Because I guarantee you, if somebody pushes to you and says, "Well, you can't prove Abraham existed," in say the year 2000 BC. But at the same time, they're going to say, well, 4,000 or 8,000 or 11,000 years ago, we have ancient aliens. Well, they don't have that proof either. They're just trying to shut you down and shut the argument down and try and get their perspective put across so they can deny that the God of the Bible is real, that humans are accountable to a sovereign God,
Yeah.
and that ultimately we will never attain godhood. That desire that's innate within fallen man, to find some way away from either true redemption through God and through Jesus Christ, or be held accountable for their sins on Judgment Day.
That's right.
They want option C. They want some other way out.
Mhm.
And so they're gonna fight this tooth and nail. And so it's not going to be an easy argument to make. We're doing this on YouTube right now, and I think maybe at most, between the three of us, if we each put them out on our channels, we might get, say, 30,000 views or whatever. And you got Joe Rogan's got John Hancock on, or Graham Hancock, and they're going to get 20 million views. I mean, who's getting the message? We are not even making a dent in that, I don't think, but we're doing what we can with the tools God gave us and with the platforms He's given us. And I just want to be found faithful in doing that. So.
Amen. Well, and I do believe, though, that the Lord is going to direct those that need to hear the message to where the message is being spoken and where the message is being taught as well.
Yeah.
Because, the Word of God says, that those who seek Him find Him. And so we're going to stick with that, right?
Sure.
If there is someone who is truly seeking the Lord, what I'm saying here is someone who does not know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, but they're truly seeking, they're truly looking for those answers. Listen, our God is a loving God. He's a forgiving God. Our God is the Redeemer. He wants them, just as us, to come to the truth and the love of the truth. And He's going to lead them in those directions if they're truly seeking. If you're truly seeking, you're watching right now, you're going to come to find the truth that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. And so you're
going to meet Him one way or the other. And
That's
are
right.
you going to meet Him as your Savior, or are you going to meet Him as your judge and creator?
That's right.
That's really what it's going to boil down to. And so we're trying to give you the truth right now, unvarnished, and that when you come to faith in Jesus Christ, who, to me, I was just thinking about this as we were talking, came at the perfect time when the Roman Empire was established, you can't deny the Roman Empire wasn't there. I mean, there's so much evidence that the Romans were there. We have every Caesar from, Julius Caesar on through the last one, uh, uh, documented and all that. He came at one of the time when there was so much evidence for existing that even non-Christians, non-Christ followers admit, hey, there was this guy named Jesus. He was this guy, and he was even if they don't believe he was the Messiah, they can say, Josephus admits it, Tacitus, and Pliny the Elder, or whatever. Not Pliny. Was it Pliny?
Yeah.
Maybe Pliny the Elder, or whatever, or the Younger. I'm not sure which. But one of those two was like, yeah, these guys were Christians. They followed this guy named Jesus. Now they're not going to admit that he was the God coming, God incarnate, God come in the flesh. But they give us the historical from a non-Christian perspective to say, yeah, that guy really existed.
Well,
Can't deny.
Well, I will say though that even Josephus had said that he had risen.
Yeah.
And worked miracles.
And worked miracles. Okay. And Josephus, unless I mean, who knows what happened, at the very last moments there, but he didn't receive the Lord as Savior and Lord.
Yeah.
So as far as we know.
Yeah.
Right. So he had nothing to gain from that. In fact, it's really interesting because none of the disciples had anything to gain by putting the message out there. There was no book deal. There was no Oprah Winfrey interview. There was no Nike shoe thing. There was there was nothing to gain, and there was literally every single thing to lose. And in fact, you've got the Roman Colosseum as an example of the lives that were lost, or many of those lives that were lost, everything. So, I mean, even just that alone is an interesting testimony, let alone just the odds, guys, the statistical odds of everything happening, including the triumphal entry as well, and that coming to pass at the exact time that it came to pass. Guys, I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal when you really begin to look at it. We've got the archaeological proof, we've got scientific proof, right? Things that were spoken of in the Word of God, that there was no possible human way of knowing those things scientifically at that time, that we've only discovered in many of those things in the past 100 years or so, okay? 200 years. Absolutely incredible, guys. And so I would say actually we do have proof of Abraham, because when you look in the Word and you see all of the prophecies, all of the things that were foretold, right? And I mean, there's no one that I know of that has done the statistical possibility of all of those things. But we've seen, maybe if you've got 50 of the prophecies about Christ's first coming, or you mix in some other things with that, the numbers are so astronomical that you come to no other conclusion but that obviously this must be the Word of God. And if that be the case, then I believe then we have everything in the proof that we need to prove that Abraham is exactly who he was, and that he walked the earth. And so
many cultures trace their both. I mean, he's a father of many nations.
Yes,
and not only
yes.
do the Jewish people trace their lineage to him, Jesus referred to him as a real person.
Right.
Jesus fulfilled 109 specific prophecies. When you look at that statistically, I think the slide that I had this weekend it's like, what was it, 120? It's like a
It was over 100 zeros.
yeah, it was like the 12 to the 124th power, which is
right. We don't have a name for that.
yeah.
Okay?
So Jesus fulfilling just
It ain't gonna happen.
48 prophecies goes to 124 zeros
Exactly.
or something. There's just no way that Jesus was who he said he was, and if that's true, if he is God come in the flesh, then we can trust him in what he says about Abraham being a real person. When he said, before Abraham was, I am. So he admits that Abraham was a real guy. He traces his genealogy back to Abraham. And not only that, but if Jesus is God incarnate, God in the flesh, he acknowledges that Abraham was a real person, just like he acknowledges
Exactly.
Noah's flood, and he acknowledges Adam and Eve, and he acknowledges these other Old Testament archetypes that the liberal seminaries and the liberal churches today will readily deny just so they can fit in with culture. They don't want to seem like religious quacks or whatever. But Jesus is saying, hey, those were real people.
Right.
And if we don't acknowledge Jesus as Christ, as God come in the flesh, then we are denying him. We are part of this antichrist system, and the love of God and the truth of God is not in us, and we're of our father the devil. That's who is a liar from the beginning, right? So let me go to these. We're going to take just the 2 questions real quick, and I'm going to pose these to you guys from the chat. We don't have time tonight to go through the normal list of questions that we would normally do. First question is the parable of the talents. This is from Patrick Hart. Question: the parable of the talents indicate the bema seat. What is outer darkness and cast into outer darkness suggests that believers are not part of something or judgments of the wicked. So what are your thoughts on that? Matthew 25, parable of the talents. The guy goes away for a long time. He gives each of them a parable, or he gives each of them a talent. One goes out and multiplies it. One multiplies it, but not as much. And the other one buries it in the ground. And so the one that buried it in the ground was considered the wicked servant. So what is it to you? Do you think that this is speaking to believers? And I know Chuck Missler had come out with a book shortly before he died called oh man, what was it called? Thy Kingdom Come or something. But he had suggested, and I don't think he was dogmatic about it, but he suggested that Christians could be put in outer darkness. And I don't know what your thoughts on it yet.
No, I don't like that theory. To me, outer darkness is a picture in the scriptures of eternal punishment. That's separation from the Father.
Yeah.
And I think when we come to this parable, I don't think it's specifically addressing the judgment seat of Christ. I think it's just addressing judgment in a broader sense, because you've got 2 that receive a reward. That reward is on the basis of grace. I think believers are going to be rewarded by the same magnanimous grace that saved us in the first place. But we're going to get more for a reward than we think, although parts of our life could very well burn up as wood, hay, and stubble. When it comes to the unprofitable servant, I think this is just an indication that this is going down the path of real believers have a real regeneration. There's a real connection with the Holy Spirit. That Holy Spirit is working fruit in them.
Yeah.
We can hinder that fruit. We can slow that fruit. We cannot stop it. And we can slow sanctification. We can hinder sanctification. We cannot bring it to a screeching halt. The Lord's got different mechanisms at his behest, discipline of various kinds, taking us home early. He will fix the problem one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm a testimony of being disciplined as a prodigal.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I just think to myself, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven.
Yeah.
And not on earth, and we store up those treasures in heaven. Well, what is that? What are those treasures that we are storing up? What are those things that we are doing? Look, we read in the Word, we see in the Word that there are rewards for all kinds of things, and who knows what those things exactly are going to be, but every step of faith that we take in our walk with the Lord, in the outworking of our salvation, because again, we can't work for our salvation. That work, it's not salvation by works, it's salvation by work, and that work was done on the cross at Calvary through Jesus Christ. So we're not working for our salvation, but the work that we do, and in fact, not getting much sleep tonight. Hey guys, this is a labor of love. Understand this. This is a labor of love. This is a get to, not a got to. But our God is a good God, and I believe that there are many wonderful rewards for his people. But darkness never speaks of the position of where God's church is going to be, and we are children of the light. We are going to dwell in the light, with the light. Darkness speaks about those who have not received the Lord.
I just want to give some illustrating information why people went down that path. It throws a little illumination on the subject. They're so afraid of defending the doctrine of salvation by grace alone. There was an overreaction to this whole controversy over, are believers going to produce fruits? Like in James, we see you'll know them by their works. By their works, you're going to know them. So, are we going to how are we going to respond to that situation? How are we going to defend it? And I think some people were so afraid of going down the path that some would call backloading works, that they frame doctrines like that.
Right. Well, that's why I say this isn't a got to.
Yeah,
It's a get to. See, before I came to the Lord, well, I didn't do a good job of this because I was a dirty, rotten sinner. But but yet, even as a dirty, rotten sinner, there were good or kind things that we would do for people, and we would, and I remember growing up. I mean, my dad would say, well, and he was trying to make himself feel good about some things he had done. Well, but my good outweighs my bad, and well, at least I didn't do that, and whatever it might be. But I think the thing is that, again, if we just recognize that what we do right now, we are doing from the standpoint out of love, our love for the Lord. This is it's not works. It's not that the works are necessary for anything. It's that we do what we do out of love. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. And God's going to bless that. I mean, He's a good God. I mean, if me raising my kids or my grandkids as a sinful man would bless my kids and my grandkids based on those things that they do, not that those things that they do are earning my love, by the way, or earning my relationship. But if there is a punishment for things that, or a loss, if you want to say, over here on this end, then it seems to make sense that there would be a gain over here on this end as well. Yeah. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how much sense I'm making when I'm this tired. So
second question was from MJ, and it was on which is the most accurate Bible, I guess, accurate Bible translation.
Oh, that's good. I mean, you could look at the ESV, the King James. You could look at the King James, the New King James, New American Standard. It's definitely not going to be the Message Bible, the Living Bible. I cringe. The Passion Bible, any of those things. I think all of those. And I know that even in saying the Living Bible, I think it's junk. But I don't know where your thoughts are on that. But
well, all the common literal translations have their own excellencies and their own known weaknesses. Sometimes those weaknesses are not weaknesses that we as ourselves as individuals would see, but they're weaknesses that the scholars are familiar with. Mm-hmm. Just off the top of my head, on the translation of the verbs in the New Testament, especially the present tense and the past tense, the modern versions, NASB, ESV, and to some degree the New King James, translate those verbs by periphrastic present and periphrastic past 7 times more commonly than we do in everyday English, where the King James has those verb tenses translated more likely correctly. The difficulty is King James has its own set of weaknesses. Yes, it does. And so I like to tell people, if you want to have an accurate Bible translation, pick one version. I don't care which one you pick for your main version, but have 2 others at least that you're going to read from time to time, especially if you're looking at a passage in Ephesians, you're scratching your head, or a passage in Deuteronomy, you scratch your head. In the multitude of counsel, there is safety. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And learn to use your Greek and Hebrew tools, even if it's just Strong's.
Yeah, I would just say to add on to both of what you all said is that for just the average person out there, when you look at the translations, you have translations that are very much thought for thought, Then you have kind of a mixing or a hybrid of thought for thought in more of a literal translation. And then you have over on this other kind of end of the spectrum is word for word.
Yep.
And so if you look at the King James or you look at the New King James, ESV, RSV, a lot of these other ones are very much word for word and an NASB. But if you go to like an NIV and the others, it'd be the other side, it'd be thought for thought. And so the thought for thought becomes a little bit problematic because now you're taking the interpretation of the people that are translating it to take the original meaning and then applying some type of a meaning to that. And that can be as benign as a I don't know which is the best NIV translate, what year. I know it's got multiple years and releases on that, but you could go as far and as bad as like the Message Bible. And just out of sheer I don't know, just for fun. I don't know if you guys have teenagers. I have teenagers, and one of the things I did for my daughter was I took a passage and I put it in the modern parlance of the of the lingo of today.
Yeah.
And I'll just read some of it to you because I think it found it to be hilarious. Let's see. I thought I had it. I thought it was just right there. Let's see. It's in my text messages here. Except, okay, here it is. I had so many texts here. I was looking for the one that I sent to my two of my daughters. Okay, here it is. This is modern lingo. So if you don't have modern teenagers, you're probably not going to understand this, but you'll hear this terminology. And it says a title, Last Days Riz, the final countdown. Yo, listen up, Pookies. You got to keep it a buck with y'all. This world, big sus. Everything's feeling like a skibbity simulation. And if you think that's cap, you're straight up Delulu. So does the meaning behind this convey the general thought about talking about the last days? Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to somebody that's 13. Somebody that's our age is like, what are they talking about? But you got to know what each one of those words mean. And so like cap means no lie or whatever. So anyways, that is like a thought for thought translation using modern lingo, things that you would find in like the Message Bible or whatever the newest translation. So you lose accuracy, you lose the original intent of the word. And I would say that if you have any issues with whatever translation you're using, you can always go to Blue Letter Bible or Logos and look at the original Greek and Hebrew. And a lot of times you'll find a word that might have 4 or 5 different definitions to it. So you got to find out which one is in context with the rest of the chapter, what's in context with the rest of the passage. So I think that's the best way you can. So whether you have New King James or RSV, ESV, NASB, I tend to lean more towards the thought or the word for word translation and stay away from the thought for thought translation because I think you get into a lot more problems that direction. And like you said, each translation has its own strengths and weaknesses. And again, you can go to the original Greek and Hebrew and look it up for yourself and be a Berean. And if you ever come across a passage that you're really struggling with, man, I would get a bunch of different people that you respect in terms of biblical teachers, your pastors, preachers, and to say, hey, what do you take from this verse and do like this, get the source this out to a bunch of people that you trust that have valid things. And if they generally agree on the definition of a particular passage, I think you're probably in good ground. You could also go again to the Greek and Hebrew and see what does it actually say in the original language that it was written in. So, well, gentlemen, I'm smoked. I don't know about y'all.
Yes, definitely. My pillow is calling me.
For real. No riz. All right, thank you guys for hanging out tonight. This was impromptu. We were going to do this last night, but we were even worse off yesterday. I think just the amount of walking and stuff we did. But we had a great time in Belfast. The 3 of us are going to be heading back to the States tomorrow, and back to, I guess, normal schedules, church and live streaming and that kind of stuff.
I'll be normal for 1 week.
1 week, and then you're off to Paraguay?
Well, no, we're going to be going.
Paraguay? No,
No, we got New Jersey and Florida coming up.
New Jersey. What dates on that? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but it's on my website under my events.
Okay, so if you're in the New Jersey area, Lee Brainerd's going to be out in your neck of the woods here really soon. Go to soothkeep.info to go get the listing, the actual dates. You got anything coming up?
The next thing coming up is in Northern California.
That's right,
Actually,
April.
with you and I.
Yep.
I'll be up there doing a conference. So Calvary Chapel up there.
I don't have any conferences or anything like that scheduled until like September. So I think I'll be doing one in Colorado with Steve Schmutzer and the Solid Bread Church there. Followed closely behind that, or I think it's going to be first in Texas. I think Tom Hughes is doing something there in North Texas. I think it's just going to be Texas speakers there sometime in September. That next weekend will be the meeting in Colorado. So I'll do those two things. And then I think right after that is Prophecy Watchers in Oklahoma City, or Oklahoma. I don't know. What was the city it was at last time? Do you remember? Norman, Oklahoma. Fantastic venue, fantastic event. I highly recommend. I think Prophecy Watchers actually has a conference coming up in this month, the end of this month in Florida.
Yeah.
So if you're in the Florida area, you got some
I will
events
be
come
at
to
that one.
Yeah. Well, I won't be at the Florida one, but I will be in the Oklahoma one
Yeah.
next fall. So thank you guys for hanging out tonight. Please keep my mom in prayer. Just my sister just texted me, said she's doing better. So keep those prayers go rolling in for her. I want to see her back in the chat and hanging out with us.
That's right.
And just God bless you. Thank you guys for being there for us as a community. I want to thank all the folks here in Ireland for their hospitality, their generosity.
Amen.
Just the hunger for the word is very strong here. And we've met so many tremendous and wonderful people here. It was really one of the best experiences of my life just coming here. It's really been
It's been great.
It's been a huge
That's
blessing.
been great.
So,
Yeah, we've loved it.
yes,
We've loved it. People
absolutely.
here have been amazing. So
I gotta find a way to move here. Refugee, I think, status is probably the bestest way. All right, thank you guys. Good night. God bless you. And I probably won't be back on. I don't know. I'm gonna have to wait and see what's going on with me, but probably most likely next week, probably Monday or so. Oh, next week for me at some point. Don't know the date yet. I should be on with Tim Gaines as my guest. We're going to be talking about Christian music over the last 40 years and how that's evolved and the challenges with secular music and how that's influencing Christian music and vice versa. And kind of the blending. We're in this like hybrid weird age where 1 week Kanye West comes out and he's all super Christian, puts out a couple of Christian albums. The next week you see him with like a swastika on his shirt, like he's lost his mind.
Bieber.
Yeah. So looking forward to talking with Tim on that subject because because we need to. I mean, we need to address these things. So thank you guys. God bless you and have a great night and a great rest of your week. God bless. Can't reach it. There it is. Need longer arms.
Yeah.